My friends, the story I'm going to share with you today is not just another police report. It's a story about the cost of bravery, about the tearing apart of families, and about heroism that unfortunately few people know about. Now close your eyes and think. You're 47 years old. You are married with a child. Every morning as you go to work, you see your wife's worried look because your job is not an ordinary office job. You are a police officer who has sworn an oath to protect his people. This is the story of Eliseo García Mozo. When he woke up that last Friday morning, he didn't know he wouldn't be able to go home that evening. He had been doing the same job for 20 years, protecting his people. But on that day, the protectors would need to be protected.
Every morning I would tell my wife, I'll be home in the evening. I had never lied to her in 20 years. That morning I made the same promise.
A small town on the Pacific coast in the Mexican state of Guerrero, Igualapa, its population is only 15,000. You may have never heard of it, most of us haven't. But the drama that's unfolding here reflects the fears that families all over the world are experiencing.
There was no one here who didn't know Eliseo. At the grocery stores, at the kids' school events, at church services. He was always smiling. Who knew he carried such a heavy burden on his shoulders?
Eliseo was not an ordinary policeman, my friends. He started as a street cop and rose to the level of assistant security director. With honest work, with courage. He knew every corner of the town. He knew every family. In a time when narco gangs were on the rise, he was one of the few people who still believed in justice. But the truth is, my friends, being a cop in some parts of Mexico is a fine line between heroism and death. It's a job where you have to be thankful every day that you get to go home. Have you ever thought, what risk does a police officer face when he leaves home every morning? People like you, like us who live normal lives, do we really realize their sacrifice?
I trusted Eliseo. We had been working together for 10 years. If an operation was planned, he would definitely share it with me. He was the only man I trusted in this town.
That Friday morning, June 25th, Eliseo and 3 friends were going on a special mission. A meeting of the Regional Peacebuilding Council, a major initiative launched by the government of the state of Guerrero. Every Friday, mayors, military commanders, and police chiefs would get together.
These meetings were promising. Finally, different institutions were cooperating. There was a real effort to bring peace to the region.
Isn't it ironic? They set out for peace, but they never returned. The reunion at the 48th Infantry Battalion in Cruz Grande would be Eliseo and his friends' last official engagement. So, do you think this was just a bad coincidence? Or was it a planned operation? Because friends, when you learn the details of this attack, you will shudder. The attackers knew which route Eliseo would take that day. They knew what time he would cross. They knew what vehicle he would travel in. They even knew who he would be with. Which means someone had sold them out. Someone from the inside had leaked information. But who? And why? Before telling that story, ask yourself these questions. If you were a cop, would you risk your life every day to protect your family? Who would you trust? And most importantly, how would you feel if one of your closest colleagues reported you?
Everything was normal that morning. The commissioner, García, seemed calm. None of us expected any danger. After all, we were returning from a peace meeting.
It's 1:30 p.m. In the afternoon, a white Toyota Hilux sets off towards Igualapa. Official plates, municipal logos, 4 police officers full of hope for the future. But after 50 kilometers, that hope will turn into a nightmare. Near the village of San Jose Las Palmas on the Federal Acapulco-Pinotepa highway, there were people waiting for them. Professional attackers, people with heavy weapons and military training. And now, my friends, I will tell you what really happened that day, but first know this. This is not just the story of the death of 4 police officers. This is the story of the horrors of every person who believes in justice in Mexico. My friends, the Federal Acapulco-Pinotepa road offers one of the most beautiful landscapes in Mexico. On one side, the deep blue waters of the Pacific Ocean. On the other, green mountains. But that day, this beauty turned into a deadly trap.
The meeting had gone very well. At last, real cooperation between different institutions was beginning. The military commanders also seemed serious this time. I was hopeful.
García, the commissioner, was watching the view from the window. "I want my children to grow up in peace in this beautiful country," he said. I will never forget his words.
It was 14:15. Eliseo's wife called, as usual. She asked, "When will you be back?" Eliseo said, "I'll be home in an hour, my love." Those were to be her last words. Now, my friends, I will tell you the details that led to that moment. But first, I need to share a few facts so you can understand how professionally this attack was planned. According to investigation reports, the attackers had prepared at least 2 weeks in advance. They had sabotaged security cameras in the area in advance. They had tapped police radio frequencies. Even that morning, there were mysterious malfunctions in the technical infrastructure at the municipality building.
That morning, the power went out in our neighborhood. The phone lines weren't working either. We realized later that this wasn't a coincidence. Everything was planned.
But the most shocking detail was that the attackers even knew what clothes Eliseo would be wearing that day, because after the attack, they targeted his personal belongings and searched him. Do you know what that means? Someone was watching every detail very closely, maybe someone who sat next to him at breakfast every morning. Maybe someone who worked in the same office.
The only person I trusted at the time was Eliseo. I wouldn't have dared to tell anyone else a secret. But I realize now that this trust had blinded us. There was an enemy within us, and we didn't know it.
The village of San Jose Las Palmas. It has a population of only 300 people. It is a quiet place where everyone knows everyone else and children play safely in the streets. But on that Friday, this peaceful village turned into a war zone.
It was around 14:30. I was watering tomatoes in my garden. Suddenly I heard very loud gunshots. It was like a war. My husband shouted, "Get inside now!"
The attackers had chosen a strategic point. Both sides of the road were rugged terrain. There was no escape route. Straight road for 5 kilometers, then a sharp bend. A perfect ambush spot. 2 pickup trucks and 4 motorcycles. About 12 to 15 attackers. They were positioned in military-style coordination. Some were on both sides of the road. Some were controlling from high points.
Only people with military training can carry out such operations. These were not ordinary criminals. It was the work of a very professional organization.
When Eliseo's car rounded the bend, the sight that awaited them was a nightmare. But there was no turning back now. The driver, Carlos Mendez, was a 15-year veteran cop. He assessed the situation immediately.
Carlos shouted, "There's an ambush." He stepped on the gas pedal, but it was too late. It all happened in seconds.
A lot of things went through my mind at that moment. My wife, my children. I thought, have I seen them for the last time today? But then my police ID kicked in. I reached for my gun.
The first salvo was terrifying, my friends. AK-47s capable of firing 600 rounds per second. AR-15 rifles. These weapons can rid a car of holes in seconds, and unfortunately they did. But Eliseo and his friends did not give up. They responded with their own weapons. Carlos was trying to maneuver the vehicle very skillfully. The 2 officers sitting in the back seat also opened effective fire.
At first I was hopeful. We were well trained, we were experienced, but then I realized that this was not an equal fight. They were much better armed than us.
The tires of the white Toyota Hilux were punctured. The radiator was punctured. The engine was slowly losing power, but the real disaster was when the driver, Carlos, was shot. Carlos Mendez, 35 years old, father of 2. He was only 10 kilometers from home, but he would not be able to return home that day. When he let go of the steering wheel, the car went out of control.
As the car overturned, it was as if time slowed down. Shards were raining down from the windows. I could see Carlos's blood, and I knew right away that we weren't going to get out of here.
When the vehicle rolled over, there was a moment of silence. The attackers had stopped firing, but it was the silence of calculated slaughter, not mercy. They were getting closer.
I could see it from afar from my window. Men in black were slowly approaching the vehicle. A person with a heart cannot be so cold-blooded.
At this point, my friends, I have to tell you a truth. When the attackers approached to finish off the wounded, Eliseo was still alive. He was trying to get out of the vehicle.
I was shot in the left shoulder, but I was conscious. I could hear them approaching. All I could think about at that moment was that I couldn't keep the promise I made to my wife.
The last moments of Eliseo García Mozo, the last breaths of a 47-year life. But this man maintained his police identity until the last moment. He tried to protect his friends. One of the attackers said something in Spanish. According to witness accounts, he said, "This is a message to the others." So this wasn't just a murder, this was a warning. It was 14:45. It had all taken 15 minutes. 4 lives were lost. 4 families were torn apart. And the security system of the state of Guerrero was deeply wounded. After the attackers had completed everything, they took the dead police officers' weapons. They took their radios. They examined any documents in the vehicle. And then, within minutes, they disappeared.
When we arrived at the scene, it was too late. We had lost track of the attackers. It was as if they had been wiped off the face of the earth. Such a quick and effective escape showed professional military training.
My friends, this is where we need to stop and think. Who was behind this attack? Why was it so important to kill these 4 police officers? And most importantly, who leaked this information?
After that day, our town changed. People started to look at each other more suspiciously because we all knew there was a traitor among us.
The investigation reports revealed a lot. For example, exactly 2 hours before the time of the attack, some telephone lines in the city hall were wiretapped. So even Eliseo's last telephone conversation was monitored.
What hurt me the most was his last conversation with his wife. He said, "I'll be home in an hour, my love." 6 months later, his wife still says she's waiting for that hour sometimes.
After the attack, the mayor, Alfredo González Nicolás, also became a target. Now he lives under constant protection, because if they were able to shoot Eliseo, he could be next. But friends, the darkest part of this story is yet to come. Because as the investigations progressed, it became clear that we were faced with a much larger conspiracy. Before Eliseo's death, other important figures in the town had been targeted. 2 weeks ago, the mayor's chief of security, Pablo Martinez Lopez, was killed. 3 days ago, another police officer. This was systematic elimination, my friends. A deliberate operation to overthrow Igualapa's security system step by step. And unfortunately, they were successful. Now I will tell you perhaps the most painful part of this story. The drama that Eliseo García Mozo's family experienced, and how this murder affected not just 4 people, but an entire society. My friends, you are lucky you never saw the funeral of Eliseo García Mozo, because that sight was one that would break a man's heart. Carmen García, Eliseo's wife of 22 years. That morning at breakfast, she told her husband, "Be careful." Those were her last words. Now she is a widow at 45, struggling alone with 2 children. Her 15-year-old daughter, Maria, and her 12-year-old son, Diego. Diego still sometimes waits for his father to come home in the evening. He asks Carmen, "Mom, when is Dad coming back?" How can Carmen explain that his father will never come back?
The whole town came together at Eliseo's funeral. But there was something strange. Some of the city workers didn't come. It was like they were scared. It was like they knew something too.
4 families were waiting by the coffins. Carmen and her children, Carlos's wife, Rosa, the relatives of the other two officers. They were all asking the same question. Why? Why them? But the real question, my friends, was, did Igualapa become a safer place after this attack? Unfortunately, the answer is no. On the contrary, chaos began.
After Eliseo's death, 12 police officers resigned. Some moved cities, some changed professions. Who can blame them? They were family men too.
2 months later, the Igualapa municipality security staff had been cut in half. The remaining police were afraid to go out on night patrols. The streets were completely empty after dark.
We don't go out after 6 p.m. anymore. I tell my grandchildren, don't play outside. But these streets used to be full of children's voices. With Eliseo's death, the town's spirit died too.
But the story doesn't end there, my friends. Because as the investigation progressed, the truth began to emerge, and that truth was much darker than anyone had feared. After a meticulous investigation lasting 6 months, it was determined that a criminal organization called Los Capuchinos was behind the attack. But the most shocking fact was that this organization had sources of information within the municipality.
Phone records, security camera footage, financial documents. Everything showed that Eliseo's daily routines had been monitored for months. This would have been impossible without the help of someone from the inside.
What hurt the most was thinking that there might be traitors among those I trusted. People I had worked with for 20 years. Who had betrayed Eliseo? Who had caused the deaths of those 4 men?
In March 2024, Municipal Treasurer Roberto Vasquez was arrested. In the indictment, he was accused of leaking information to a criminal organization. He was a man who had worked in the municipality for 8 years and was trusted by everyone. Roberto's confession was shocking. Members of the organization had threatened his family. They said, either you give information or you will never see your wife and children again. Roberto sold Eliseo to protect his family. My friends, stop here and think. What would you do if you were Roberto? Would you protect your family or would you do your duty? It's not an easy decision. But there's another side to the story. What changed in Igualapa after Eliseo's death? Did the drug traffic decrease? Did the violence stop? Unfortunately, no. On the contrary, the security vacuum has played right into the hands of criminal organizations. The drug routes Eliseo tried to destroy have become active again. The town has become an even more dangerous place.
Now we hear strange noises in the middle of the night. Unfamiliar vehicles pass through town. Eliseo used to stop such things. Now no one interferes.
Carmen García had to move 3 times after her husband's death because she was constantly receiving threats. Your husband is interfering with our business too much, they would tell her. Your husband will also keep quiet. But Carmen has not been silent, my friends. She has not lost faith in justice. She continues to fight for Eliseo's killers to be punished because she knows that if she remains silent, her husband's death will mean nothing. In August 2024, the 4 perpetrators of the attack were arrested, but the leaders of the organization are still at large. The main instigators are still evading justice. This means that justice has not yet been fully achieved. During the hearings, the attackers showed no remorse. One even testified that Eliseo García brought about his own end. These words broke Carmen's heart once again. Now, 18 months later, Igualapa is still trying to heal its wounds. A new police chief has been appointed. Security measures have been increased. But everyone knows that it is very difficult to regain this lost trust.
The new police chief is young and idealistic, like Eliseo. But I always tell him, be careful. Being honest in this land can sometimes be fatal.
The new police chief is young and idealistic, like Eliseo. But I always tell him, be careful. Being honest in this land can sometimes be fatal.
Eliseo García Mozo's tombstone reads, "He believed in justice, he loved his people,
He never abandoned his duty. These words summarize his life.
But perhaps his fondest memory is of his statue in the town square. Carmen and her children would go there every Sunday and leave flowers. And Diego stood in front of his father's statue and said, "When I grow up, I'm going to be a police officer too." I asked Carmen one day, "Aren't you afraid?" I said, "Your son will face the same dangers?" She replied, "If no one shows courage, then Eliseo's death was in vain." That, my friends, is true courage. To never lose hope even after you have lost. To keep believing in justice, and to fight to leave a better world for future generations. Does this story sound familiar? Maybe you've known people in your life who did the right thing, but paid the price for it. Maybe you've also had to decide whether to show courage or not during difficult times. The story of Eliseo García Mozo is not just the story of Mexico. It is the story of people all over the world who have taken a stand for justice. And this story reminds us that we must not forget them. If the story touched your heart, the best way to keep Eliseo's memory alive is to embrace his values. To stand for justice, to stand up for the weak, and to never give up. And remember, my friends, in every society there are Eliseo García Mozos. Maybe they are not police officers, maybe they are teachers, maybe they are doctors, maybe they are ordinary citizens, but they all silently fight for a better world. My request to you is this. Don't forget this story. Don't forget Eliseo's name. And in the difficulties you face in your life, remember his courage. Because true heroism is not about being perfect, but about continuing to do what is right. Carmen Garcia and her children still live in Igualapa. They still believe in justice. They still try to keep Eliseo's values alive. And maybe that is the greatest victory of all, because no matter how strong the evil is, the spirit of good does not die. Eliseo García Mozo, a police chief, a husband, a father, and a hero will be remembered forever. May his soul rest in peace.